Set Phasers, a highly illogical Star Trek podcast. Hello. Oh, God.
What the hell are you doing?
My goodness. My notes are in the way of all the buttons. And I realized too late. I was like, I can't see the unmute. And then I had to move everything. And then it took forever. Hello.
I was like, where did he go? You coming down to do some sort of surprise hello?
Yeah, I was gonna. And hello. How are you doing?
I'm well. It's Friday, so it's my favorite day. It's Star Trek Day. How are you doing?
Friday. I'm doing great. As you well know, I also love Friday because it's Star Trek Day.
Yeah.
And we got some big announcements from Star Trek, sort of.
Oh yeah.
Today, which is pretty
good news
sweet about the new episodes, the new series is. Word on the street being that Discovery might come out, maybe even at the end of the year. Towards the end of the year.
Shock. I need rather than a dun dun dun. I need like one of those kind of.
You need
shock.
like a record scratch, like a. Yeah. Well, let me hit down. The star date is. I finally figured out star dates for this. Star date is 2130219.6, and today we're discussing Season 1, Episode 3 of Star Trek Picard. Boom!
Shall we run it down?
Let's run it down. Yes. It's time to run it down. Can you run it down for me? Talk about Picard now. Run it down for me.
Dun.
Yeah, it's coming. Point taken. Okay, so this is the end in the beginning. It's a little confusing, but bear with me. We're going to get through this. So a lot of things happen and start to happen and begin to happen and start to take shape in this episode. It's pretty great, but it's all world building. So we start with a Mars flashback. It's the androids, the something 300s, I forgot what they're called, and they kill people, and they kill themselves, and Mars's atmosphere explodes, and it's on fire. And so we see Picard coming out of Starfleet headquarters, and there's a young Raffi with her hair up in a bun. She's looking all natty in her yellow suit, and she's asking Picard, like, hey, how did it go? Did they go for it? And he's like, I laid the plan out. And he's like, they said we didn't have enough ships. He says, but I told you about those extra ships. And he's like, I told them about the extra ships. And they said we were undermanned. He's like, but I told you about those extra personnel. And she's like, I mentioned the extra personnel and the extra like synth. And she was like, and he was like, well, so I laid it all out for them. And they said that if that plan would allow things to go forward at a very diminished level. And Raffi was like, what? And he was like, they were very critical of the plan. And she was like, what about if we use synthetic life forms? That was the third part of her thing. Then we could definitely do this whole rescue thing. Because remember, Mars is burning, yes, but also the star of Romulus has gone supernova and is about to like wipe out billions of people. And that's what they're there for. But apparently Starfleet will no longer allow any synthetic life forms to be used for any kind of act. In fact, they're all being decommissioned. It's illegal to have synthetic life forms because there was a, quote, fatal code error. And that's why they killed humans. And Raffi's like, what? No, that doesn't even make sense. Why would androids do that? She thinks that there's some sort of connection to the Tal Shiar somehow, which Picard is like, I don't even get why the Tal Shiar would cause this to harm the Starfleet to prevent us from getting people away from the star that's going supernova. Raffi, it's too much. He says, but I still went to bat for your plan. And he gave the council an ultimatum. He said, you either accept this plan or you accept my resignation. And they accepted his resignation. And then Rafi gets I wanted to say she gets beeped by.
She gets a text.
She gets a text. She gets an alert that the CNC wants to see her, the commander in chief. And she goes, oh, great. You resign and throw away the plan. And now I'm getting fired. And then she leaves upset. Boom, credits. Back to present day. As you recall, Picard had just convinced Rafi not to shoot him by offering him her wine and the Tal Shiar thing, the secret Romulan agents on the planet.
Little tidbit he knew that she would love.
Like, hey, remember how you thought the Tal Shiar involved? Well, now I'm on board. It's only been 14 years. He explains the situation with Dahj and how she died and all that stuff. And he says, listen, I need a ship and a pilot because I've got to find Bruce Maddox. And Rafi, who's not looking as natty and well done up and all together, is looking a little not quite together. And she pulls some leaves off of a plant on her porch and she puts them into a weird tube device and they burn and she smokes it. She's smoking it. Apparently it's called snake leaf. She said, it's been 14 years of humiliation and rage and I've lost things and you never called. You didn't even call to say hello. You know, it would have been nice to hear from you because I wasn't doing well. And she's like, snake leaf induced paranoia has been sort of ruling her life. And she lost her security clearance and she lost ... But then she stops herself and she storms off. Picard goes after her. Meanwhile, on the artifact, quote, the Borg cube, we meet at long last.
I was going to ask a question about Rafi's abode and where it is situated.
Yeah.
Does that rock face, is that supposed to be where the whole Gorn battle was with Kirk? You know, that rock face that kind of sticks out?
Yes, I know what you're talking about. I don't think it's supposed to be the Gorn battle place.
An homage.
It looks very Gorn-esque. I think now, listen, I don't want to get nerd bombed by people who know better than I. I do have a few books about these things, but I believe the Gorn episode was recorded at Joshua Tree in California. And so if they're still using that area, it may be someplace close.
That popped up and it said Vasquez something?
Vasquez Rocks, which I assume is a rocky place in California. Be my guess.
Sorry.
No, that's why we're here. These are the important things.
Little nitty gritty things that we nerd out about.
We need to get into this stuff. Meanwhile, on the artifact, we see Hugh, whom we've not seen since Hugh. Whom we've not seen since
Hugh who?
Since Hugh.
Who Hugh?
Hugh. Who? What am I doing?
What are we doing?
So on the artifact, we meet Hugh, who was a Borg that the Enterprise ran into, that they were able to get his implants out, and he became back. He was like a human, and he's back human, but he's sort of like a 7 of 9, proto 7 of 9. Didn't integrate with the crew or anything, but he has a whole episode where he sort of returns to his former life, and he sort of has to figure out what's going on. So now we find out what Hugh's been up to in the intervening years. He is now on the artifact, and he's the director of the XB's area. The XB's being, I presume, ex-Borg. He sees when Soji Asha, Dr. Asha, was talking to the Nameless in the previous episode and spoke to it in its language. And so he approaches her and he says, hey, you've always been excellent, but I saw what you did with that Nameless. That's wonderful. And so I'm going to allow you to interview Ramda, whoever Ramda is. And Soji is very excited about this. And she's like, oh, have you read the Romulan dossier on Ramda? And he was like, no, how would you have read it? And she's like, anyway, she was a foremost expert on ancient Romulan myth. And as an anthropologist, I believe that there can be therapy through shared myth. And he was like, okay, well, you got 30 minutes. So good luck. Back to Vasquez Rocks. Picard finds Rafi. She's stormed off. He apologizes for being Picard, essentially. And he mentions, hey, listen, these Tal Shiar are here, and I suspect they couldn't operate openly on Earth without Federation complicity, like you hinted at in the cold open. And Rafi is like, listen, what we were talking about 14 years ago, I have evidence of that there was Federation complicity in the attack on the shipyards in Mars. But Picard's like, listen, I need your help because you're so able to see things that other people don't see. I think at this point, we're supposed to see like that Rafi is like ace, sort of like pattern recognition, hacker, puzzle solver kind of person that like was Picard's first pick to be his like, I don't know what XO, even though he didn't have a ship, but she was like his number one when he was an admiral. And so he needs her to help him figure out what's going on with this conspiracy. And she's like, no, there's no way I'm going back down that rabbit hole. Look what it's done to me in my life in the last 14 years. But I found you a pilot, and the pilot will be in touch. His name is Rios. That's all we get. So then it jumps to the Daystrom Institute, where Dr. Jurati, Agnes Jurati, is just...
You love saying Jurati.
Jurati. I don't want to say Jurati.
Jurati.
Dr. Jurati. Sounds like how we would have said like our teacher's name in high school in Brooklyn. Hey, Dr. Jurati. Hey, welcome back, Kata. That's what it sounds like to me. Sounds like a bad John Travolta impersonation. Hey, Dr. Jurati.
What gives?
Hey, what gives, Dr. Jurati? You talking to Commodore O? She's the head of Starfleet Security. What's going on there?
Hey, with the shoulder shrug.
With the shoulder shrug. Hey. Anyway, Dr. Jurati is eating lunch, I presume, on a bench beneath the tree, looking out, listening to classical music on her earbuds. And then she turns to look around behind her, and Commodore O is there in Starfleet uniform, but also sunglasses. I don't know why that really makes me laugh, because she's supposed to be like a spy or whatever.
In like Top Gun sunglasses with the ears.
Yeah, you don't look nondescript in your yellow security uniform just because you throw some sunglasses on. But whatever, it's cool. I like it gives a sense of cloak and dagger. And no spoilers, we won't talk about the sunglasses anymore. Anyway, Jurati is like, oh, sorry, who are you? And she's like, I'm Commander O, and I just want to talk to you about the 2 visits you've had with Picard. Dun, dun, dun. What could they possibly have to talk about? We won't find out in this episode, because then we go back to the artifact. Hugh is leading Soji in to speak to Ramda. We meet the disordered. They're all Romulans who were, I guess they were attempted to be assimilated, but the assimilation didn't take. And so now they're sort of like, I guess, no way to describe it, but they're like sort of like, what's the word when you're you're not like really there. You're there, but you're not
delirious?
There. They're not, they're delirious. They're like deconnected. It's something D. Anyway, it might be
disconnected, dissociated.
Yes. Hey, look at us.
We got it together.
Teamwork makes the dream work. So they're like drawing and working on like something that looks like one of those
Rubik's cubes.
And Ramda is flipping through some triangular shaped cards, which I guess have some sort of mythological.
They were like Romulan tarot cards to me.
They're like Romulan tarot. That's what I assumed, and which we find out towards the end. They are exactly like Romulan tarot cards. Anyway, Soji's like, oh, that's interesting. And they look over at Ramda, and she's flipping through cards. And we zip back to Earth, where Rafi is doing research. She's smoking snake leaf. She's looking at weird screens, and she's all glingly glang. And she gets a message from Picard. It looks exactly like that. Thank you very much. Very good prop work. And she gets a message from Picard. She picks up. And she's like, what? And Picard's like, hey, you're researching, aren't you? And she's like, no. And he's like, here's some more information. And thanks for being a part of the plan. That was one of the quotes, actually, I picked. So we'll get back to that later. So Picard, in the meantime, finally hears from the pilot. He goes to the vessel. I noted that when he first arrives, you hear the ba-boopita, boopita theme underneath. And I was like, this is going to be the ship. This is going to be the ship. He's approached by a very handsome, very British man wearing a white shirt and like a cardigan or something. And he's like, oh, hello, you're here finally. Oh, yes, follow me. And say, and we think that that's Rios, but maybe it's not Rios anyway. That leads them to someone sitting in the pilot's chair with a shard of like titanium sticking out of their shoulder and their shirt off and smoking a cigar. And I guess that's the real Rios. But he's made his emergency hologram look exactly like him, only with like a sort of upper crusty, sort of intellectual accent. Not quite British.
Do we think it's somewhat narcissistic?
Yeah. Yeah, he's got serious ego problems.
He wanted it. Well, was he a first officer and he wanted to be a captain, obviously? Though you've got to have a bit of an ego.
He was an XO, yes.
Yeah.
He was an XO. He's got a big ego. He's conflicted. We learn all this in the following conversation, so we might as well get into it. He was the XO of a ship that apparently got into some trouble. It was called the Ibn Majid, and it has been expunged from Starfleet records for some reason, some mysterious reason. And he's reading a book, the title of which is My Tragic Sense of Life. I forgot to write down the author's name. But he and Picard have a chat while the emergency hologram pulls the shard out of his shoulder, and he's drinking and smoking his cigar. And it really made me want us to have a cigar, but that's neither here nor there, Steph.
Cigar.
Yeah. We
bonded over cigars.
We did. We should shove titanium into our shoulders and open a bottle of something and smoke.
Scotchy.
Scotch. I couldn't tell what the drink, and you can't, I don't want to get into this. This is me getting off track again. So
this is why I should drink, because then I don't interrupt you. When I pay more attention.
I've been told that a lot. People should drink when they listen to me talk. I think they go hand in hand. Okay, so Picard and they talk back and forth, and he asks questions about what Picard wants to do. And Picard's like, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but it's going to be a little bit in the gray area, like not quite legal, not quite illegal, but they know about Rafi and they suss each other out. And so meanwhile, Rafi is continuing to do her research, and she finds some kind of quantum fingerprinting, blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of techno stuff. But anyway, all her things lead to a place called Free Cloud. Back on the ship, Rios, we assume sometime later, is now reading his sad, sad book. And another hologram shows up. It's not the same hologram. It's like a different hologram. This one has a very, I would describe it as crudely broad Irish accent. And it's talking to him about, he's talking about Picard with this Irish holo, who I surmise is like sort of a psychologist, but also is giving him an update on the ship. But anyway, he's like, are we excited? Are you happy? And Rios is like, I don't want to talk about this. He's so brooding. And he does mention that he doesn't need a new big captain in his life because he can't close his eyes without seeing his last captain's blood and brains splattered over a bulkhead. And he deactivates the holo. So there's a story there, though I'm not sure what.
For dang sure. We don't know.
For dang, there is. Now you're Southern.
Oh, God.
For dang sure, Southwestern. Yeah, there's a story there for dang sure. Meanwhile, back on Chateau Picard, and this is where things get very complicated, so I'm sure 18 planes will fly overhead. Meanwhile, back on Chateau Picard, Picard is there with his knapsack because he's like, I'm trying to get out of here. He's talking to his housekeeper, and he's like, hey, I never really felt like I belonged here, but I tried my best. And she's like, yeah, you always had your eye on the stars. Hugh and Soji are on the Borg cube, and they're talking to Ramda, and they see Ramda put down a card, and Soji mentions that's the card for the false door because all Romulans' houses have a front door that's a false door. No one uses that door. You have to go to a door around back. So she takes the chair that's at the table, and she puts it behind Ramda, and she asks if she can sit down, and Ramda says, please sit. So she's broken through to Ramda. Meanwhile, the chateau is attacked, and like disruptor fire, and Laris and Zabin fly into action like super fast. And this is when we find out that they're not just Romulan expats that he's made his housekeepers. They're incredibly highly trained Romulan, like I guess former Tal Shiar, and they take out like 6 of these other, full bodysuit Tal Shiar people, the people that killed Dahj essentially. And we also, I wrote, there's a lot of hidden phasers in the chateau.
Under tables.
Like Picard pulls one out of a thing. There's one under a table. There's one under a couch. So they are ready for, as rustic and beautiful as the chateau looks, they are ready for war at any time to like hold out against an army. And they vanquish all the foes. And then they're just like checking in with each other. Everybody all right? And then one more shows up, but then it's shot in the back by a blaster. And who should be holding that blaster but Agnes Jurati, who's like, I thought it was on stun. And then Lara says, Romulan disruptors don't have a stun setting. So you killed that dude. They tie up the prisoner. And Jurati is explaining that she had a visit from O when she was at Daystrom, and she's trying to say something to Picard, but then they wake the prisoner up, and Picard's like, okay, let's start questioning him. Meanwhile, back on the artifact, Soji is talking with Ramda, and she says, as an anthropologist by training, I'm interested in what these cards might mean. Do they connect to a mythology? And that gets a rise out of Ramda. She goes, mythology. I hate that word. And Soji says, what word would you use? And Ramda says, the news. And this leads Soji into like a weird anthropologist excitement moment. She's like, yes, the idea that former Borg might be able to create a shared narrative framework for understanding their trauma, rooted in deep archetypes as relevant as the day's news. Nerd excitement. And then Ramda looks up at Soji and she's like, I know you. And Soji's like, oh no, we've never met before. Meanwhile, back on Chateau Picard, Picard is asking, why are the Tal Shiar on Earth? Why did you kill Dahj? What's the deal? And the prisoner is not really being responsive. And then back on the cube, Ramda says she remembers Soji from tomorrow. And Soji somehow knows that Ramda was on the last ship that cube had tried to assimilate, that the ship was taken captive. Everyone on the ship was assimilated by the Borg, and then something went wrong. And that's why the cube became inactive and disconnected from the Borg, the bigger Borg hive mind. And then Ramda says, which sister are you? Are you the one who dies or the one who lives? Meanwhile, Picard and his team are talking to the guy, and he says, why did you kill Dahj? Why did you kill that girl? And the attacker says, she's no girl. And then Ramda says, I do recognize you back on the cube. She says, you are Seb Cheneb. You are the destroyer, just as we flash back to the chateau. And the Romulan that they have captured says, she's the destroyer. Whew. And the Romulan in Picard's living room then gets punched because he does something stupid. He falls back on the floor, and then he bites down on what I guess is like an acid tablet or something and spits it onto Zabin, but Zabin's able to get it off, but it manages to dissolve the Romulan, so they lose their captive that they were trying to get information from. Meanwhile, back on the cube, Ramda gets up after she calls her destroyer. She pulls the disruptor from one of the guards in the rooms who's supposed to have the disruptors secured when they're in their room with the disordered, and she tries to shoot herself, but then Soji is able to stop her using what we presume, this might be a time to use the thing. Non-human, probably very synthetic style. Yes.
Warning. Synthetic life form.
Yeah, because she moves way too fast to get that disruptor out of Ramda's hands, and she's able to stop Ramda from killing herself. And then, but it has made all the other disordered in the room very upset. And then at the end of that scene, they're all staring at Soji, upset and angry. So Soji, distraught, sometime later, after that scene, runs back to her room, and she calls her mother, just like Dahj did that one time, if you may recall, in the pilot episode. And she asks, hey, is Dahj okay? And her mother, that we now maybe don't know what that mother thing is, says, yes, Dahj is great. She's thinking about getting a dog. I'm not sure it's the best idea. And then Soji, like listening to her mother drone on, just boop, passes out. Sometime later, sexy Romulan Narek shows up. I knew he'd have to be back.
Who do you prefer, Narek or Rios?
They both have the same sort of troubled thing going on, the same unkempt haircut, the same dark affectation.
You got to see Rios with his shirt off. Thought you might have had a moment.
You get to see Rios with his shirt off, which you know I do enjoy. But I think that I prefer Rios because he has a sense of humor.
Yes.
Even though he's like brooding and, whatever. The fact that he made those holograms is sort of implicates him in some sort of, he has like at least a wry sense of humor about his predicament. Whereas Narek is just like brooding and sad and weird and like a little too gothy with no smile.
He's the kind of guy you would date in your early 20s before you mature.
And even if I was like sort of into him, the scene where he like shows up and he's like, hey, how are you? And Soji is like, oh, I don't know how I knew all that stuff. If you'd asked me 5 minutes before, I would have said I didn't know anything about the Romulan ship or Ramda. She says, I don't know how it happened, but somehow I know it. Maybe I read it in a weird like thing that should have been redacted, but it wasn't. And she goes like, do you believe me? And he, instead of like responding to her, he like takes her hand and sits down on the bed and he says, can you keep a secret? And she's like, what? And he like leans in and he goes, I think I'm falling in love with you. Well, that's just gross. So anytime somebody doesn't answer a question with, first of all, listen, I know we're talking about Star Trek here, but clear red flags. If you have to make yourself 3 times removed from I love you to say it, something is wrong. If he's like, I think I am falling in love with you, what does that mean? It's like, I think maybe I might eventually be in a position where I love you. Anyway, it's weird and it's gross, and he whispers it in her ear and then embraces her. And that's what Narek does. That's his secret. Anyway, as he's leaving, he's out in the hall, and who should be waiting for him but Narissa, who we saw in the last episode with human ears. She says, I'm back. And he sees that she's got her Romulan ears, and he says, and so are your ears. So I guess he does have a sense of humor, but he's extra creepy. So he still loses. Narissa basically says she can smell Soji on him, and it smells carnal. Ooh, yeah. And she wants information. She's like, what have you got from Soji? And he's like, I don't have anything right now. She doesn't know what she is or what she knows. And he's like, I think we should keep that from her as long as possible. Well, Narissa might agree that the mission on Earth was a mistake because they lost the opportunity to interrogate Dahj. She does feel like Narek's approach, which is a little unorthodox, which he says is more subtle, needs to show results soon. And she tells Narek that's fine, but to be careful of his feelings. Don't go falling in love. Anyway, I think we definitely know that they're siblings, but there's like a weird sexual tension between them that I also think is weird. Back to Chateau Picard. Dr. Girardi is on the couch, and she's explaining that she had to tell O everything because she's a bad liar. But one thing she didn't tell O was that she wants to go with Picard to find the second sense, because she's like, that's what you're doing. And Picard's like, my mom. But then he gets a call from Rios, and Rios says, hey, things are getting hot. I got sources saying that people are about to know that what you're about to do, and they're about to come after us. So Girardi makes the cause for going with Picard. She's like, you're a good man who knows about pity, and I have waited for this moment for all of my life. And also, I'm the foremost expert on synthetic life forms in the Federation, and so I need to go with you. And Picard says, all right. So they beam aboard, and Rios is there, and Girardi's there. And who else is there? Raffi. Raffi's there. And Picard's so delighted. He's like, oh, Raffi. And so Raffi says, I'll tell you where I think Maddox is if you take me with you. And he says, I'd love for you to go with us. And she's like, I'm not with you. I'm not with you at all. Don't ever assume that. I just need a ride because Maddox is in Free Cloud. And everyone wants to know where Raffi wants to go to Free Cloud. But she's not going to tell anybody why she wants to go to Free Cloud. So they get into position, and Rios is sitting in his chair, and he looks up at Picard, and Picard goes, engage. And that is the end of episode 3, season 1 of Star Trek Picard, the end in the beginning.
Oh, yeah. We're finally onto the ship.
We're finally on a ship, and we finally got
ready
to warp.
Ready to go.
Pew!
Pew, pew, pew.
Pew, 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 pew,
Ooh, do I have a warp sound? I might have a warp sound. Engage.
Anyway, that was sweet. I thought this was a great episode, but like I said, there's so many disparate things to keep in mind. There's like the conspiracy that Rafi thought about 14 years ago with the shipyards on Mars. There's a conspiracy going on now that Picard needs Rafi to help him with. There's Soji sort of waking up into what she is becoming, but also the deal with Ramda and calling Soji Seb Cheneb, the destroyer, and what that means. And there's the connection between Narek and Narissa and what's going on there. And are they really working for the Federation? If so, why was she in disguise on Earth and not in disguise on the cube? But maybe it would make sense. No, it doesn't make sense.
Was she actually on the cube or was she projecting onto the cube? I forgot.
She was projecting. She was on the way. Yeah. And also, why does Rafi want to go to Free Cloud? What's going on there? What did Dr. Girardi and Commodore O discuss? It's just a lot of open questions. Oh, and then what's going on with Rios? Why is he so upset? And what's happened? His other captain's brains on the bulkhead. So there's a lot of questions, a lot of things set in motion. And finally, the ship is set in motion. But the only person whose motives, thank you, the only person whose motives we truly understand are Picard's. So it's great. He's surrounded by possible allies, but everyone has mysterious ulterior motives that may not quite come into light. It's a very different situation for Picard, who usually is the captain. And so everyone takes on his impetus. And here he's really hoping that people will help him do what he wants to do. So I don't know. That's my feeling of the end is in the beginning, that there's a lot being set up and a lot that must be answered before Picard season 1 is over. Shall we move on to quotable moments?
Quotable moments.
Indeed. Let's talk about quotes.
Let's talk about quotes, baby.
Let's talk about
you and me. I will start. The exchange between Rafi and Picard when he calls her when she's researching after she's told him that she's not interested in helping him. She picks up and she says, "What?" And he says, "You're doing the research, aren't you?" And she goes, "No." And he goes, "I'm sending you everything that the Daystrom had on Bruce Maddox." And she goes, "I don't want it." And he says, "Carry on," and then hangs up. Which was a nice indication of the relationship, but also, Picard being Picard.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I believe you have a quote that is elucidative.
I had one. It was Rios, and he said, after a interlude, shall we say, with Picard?
Picard's like, "I look at your ship and I see everything's ship shape. Everything is standard and order. Nothing out of place. You've got everything stowed, Federation style. You've got Starfleet in your bones. It's in your heart. I can practically smell it on you."
Rafi warned me you were a speech maker.
Jean-Luc, sometimes I think the only reason I come here is to listen to these wonderful speeches of yours.
I need to do a TikTok to that.
Yeah.
Oh. I need to understand how to use TikTok, and then I'll do that.
Well, I don't, so don't look at me. I put something on TikTok this weekend.
Oh.
I haven't checked to see what happened. It's just me making coffee, which is the only kind of movie I like making. And the last quote we'll use, I really liked what Hugh said. I thought it's telling. It's hinting at. So when he's speaking to Soji and he mentions that there are no more despised people in the galaxy than the XBs. People either see us as property to be exploited or as a hazard to be warehoused. Our hosts, the Romulans, have a far more expansive vision. They see us as both. So next time?
Let's find my buttons.
Next time on Set Phasers.
Next time on Set Phasers, we will be discussing episode 4 of Picard, entitled Absolute Candor. So we'll see what happens. What kind of candor is candored in absolute candor? It should be the absolute kind, but I seem
remember
to
that
doubt
one.
it. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Some things are going to happen.
Radical truth, isn't it?
Well, yes.
Sort of.
Radical truth. Absolute
Absolute
candor.
I
Is
feel like
basically
that-
radical truth. Yeah.
Radical truth, but that's a real thing, though. Anyway, did you say the thank you? Did you? Do your
No,
bit?
I haven't said any of this.
Oh, yeah. You were looking at me to say something. I was like, oh shit.
No,
what
I
am
just
saying?
was. I was excited about the next episode. I'd be happy to talk about it now, but we can just listen. Listen. Thank you. It's a great one. I hope you're watching along with us. Keep watching and keep listening. Thank you so much for joining us.
We forgot to talk about news. We forgot to talk about
Oh
news.
my
Star
goodness.
Trek
Well, we'll have to
news.
push it back to next week. It's fine.
All
We can
right,
talk about all
all
them. Yeah, we need to make a segment.
A news
We need
segment.
to put some time because there's so many new episodes of things.
Well, you need to do a sound effect for that, don't you?
Well, yes, I'll do it. Okay, so
okay.
thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the program, you can catch us every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, where we will bicker like children on Facebook Live or as a podcast every Monday, wherever podcasts come from.
Oh, we're such a dynamic duo. We are, of course, on Facebook and Instagram at Set Phasers Podcast. Please feel free to follow us and join in the conversation of all things Trek and my meme games. My meme game
Meme
is
game
strong.
strong. Meme game strong. If you
The
want
force,
to,
the meme force
the meme
is strong.
force in this one. If you want to support our continuing mission to discover what Picard has in store for us, the wordplay doesn't work
Picard.
as well there. Picard, we'd only be delighted. You can patronize us. We can take it by going to patreon.com/setphasers and signing up there. It would mean a lot to us.
It would mean lots of coffee. Well, at least 1 or 2 coffees each.
Plenty
which would be
coffee.
nice.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, that's really all we want in life.
That's all we need.
Well, until next time, I am Stevie.
And I am Aki Burmese, and this has been Set Phasers, a highly illogical Star Trek podcast.
Computer. End program.